Hi, welcome to the Rittner Floral School in Boston, Mass. I'm Dr. Steve Rittner, and it's a pleasure to welcome you into one of our classrooms today. We've got a neat demonstration planned for you. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. The subject of this particular demonstration is going to be how to make a contemporary style table centerpiece. Now, normally when we think of a table centerpiece, we think of something that's going to go in the middle of a table. Obviously, it's something that can be viewed all the way around. Usually when we think of table centerpieces, we go in one of two directions. Either we go very, very low, or we go very, very high. In other words, typically when we're talking about a table centerpiece, maybe we've got a container like this. We make something that's kind of roundy in it. It's very pretty, and it's fairly low on the table. Or, alternatively, we might go with a container that is a fairly low container and do something that's more in a horizontal kind of vein. These are typical kinds of things, and they're lovely. And you can do some beautiful things using these two motifs. Alternatively, the other approach that we sometimes will use in table centerpiece work is to go very, very high. In other words, take a piece of glassware, it might be a trumpet container or it could be a cylinder of some sort, and come up extremely high and then build the design over the sight lines. The idea being, in both cases, we've got people looking over the design in the case of a low one, or the arrangement is so high that sight lines are not impeded looking through. Today we're going to suggest a slightly different approach. Typically what we tell our students here at Rittners Floral School in Boston is that table centerpieces work fine as long as our eyes can see over the arrangement if it's a low kind of thing. In other words, we call it the nostril factor. If your nose is above the flowers, above the container, you can see above the container, and therefore it'll work. So while we can go very low, and yes, we can go very high to see straight across, how about something more along this line? In other words, a container that isn't absolutely low, but isn't absolutely high, but if we were sitting at this table, our eyes would be around here. The nostril factor, our nose is above the container, and therefore we still have decent sight lines. It gives an interesting look, and it's something that you guys might want to consider and may want to play with. Now, the container that I have here feels like a cement planter, obviously something a little bit too heavy for a typical table. Well, I've got news for you. This looks like a cement planter, but look, very, very light. This is actually made out of resin plastic. It feels like some of those big cement planters that you see out there. It's a very lightweight container. I have it filled with shredded styrofoam, or I could use some of my recycled foam that's dried out to keep the weight factor down. The heaviest part on this container is that in this particular case, I have a couple of pieces of foam in here, and that is really providing most of the weight on this. And I like it because it's got a very sleek, contemporary kind of view, a sleek, contemporary kind of look. It's got a nice curve, it's got curves over there. It's a neutral color, which means we can do practically anything with it. And to do this design, we're going to play with some interesting combos. I think you guys will really enjoy it. The first thing that I'm going to be playing with, and this I'm sure you're going to find interesting, kale. Yes, kale. You know the kale that you get in the supermarket? Well, that's exactly where I got this. I got some beautiful kale at the supermarket, and it looked so nice, I just couldn't help myself taking care of it. I do the same thing that I do with any of my foliage. I took it, cut the stems, put it in warm water, refrigerated it. It looks absolutely gorgeous. And of course, we're thinking on something like this that it would typically be created for the use that particular day. In other words, it would be made for designing the day of that designing. This is going to be a design that's meant to be viewed all the way around. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my kale, and I'm going to place it all the way around on this design. In other words, it's meant to be viewed essentially almost like a horizontal container, but something that is just a little bit more elevated. And I'm going to work some of my kale working around the edges of the design. I think you're going to find this is an interesting way of looking at it. It's a little bit different, but those of you who've come to our school in Boston know that periodically I do like to take some of our things from the veggie and fruit section and take produce and play with it in floral art. And my family, I drive them nuts when we go to the supermarket and I get what my family call that look again, when we go into the produce section and then I start looking at stuff and they say, that's not going to make it up to the house in terms of eating. That's going to be used in a floral design somewhere. So you notice that with just a few pieces of kale, it gives a very, very different look to our design. So consider our standard foliages, but also consider maybe something like kale, because that can give a really cool look as well. Now, I'm going to play with a few other things in this design. There are two things you never can go wrong with. You can never go wrong when you put a few big flowers into one of these things. And we've got some of our hydrangea. Our hydrangea is big, it's showy, people love it. Make sure you well hydrate this very, very well prior to use, and make sure you add plenty of water on it so it'll hold up. I also have another big flower that we're going to be playing with on this one, and that is some of our Fujis. Fujis are a very, very big flower, and these particular Fujis are green in color. I love the green. It's a fairly recent innovation, and I think it really gives a very, very nice look to our designing. And what I'm going to do is start by taking several of our flowers, these big flowers, several of our hydrangea, and I'm going to place one towards the front. Right over here, I'm going to place another one kind of towards the back, facing in the other direction. So I've got two almost at a diagonal. I'm going to take several of my Fujis, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to put them in the other direction. In other words, I'm placing one kind of over here. Let's see if we can get it up a little higher so you can see it, my viewer. And then another one that I'm going to be placing more leaning towards the front. So I've got one over here. So what I'm really doing here is almost like a crisscross. Two hydrangea going in this direction, two of my Fujis going in that direction. That fills an enormous amount of space. These things are really, really quick, easy, and fun to do. So one trick that you can use when you're doing these things, besides the trick of the kale, is to take some of your big flowers and by throwing a few in, notice how quickly this thing is coming together. Now I'm going to use another flower that happens to be one of my favorite and some of the favorites that people have. I'm going to use some roses. Notice I've got some fairly big roses. We could use a standard rose on this. We could also use garden varieties. It depends on what you want and what kind of colors you're looking for and so forth. But I love these because when you start playing with things like your roses and like your hydrangea, you're automatically pushed into what I would call a prestige factor, and you cannot go wrong. People love these. They're showy, they're big, they're pretty, and they just work so nicely, and you can come up with all kinds of great effects. So notice, my viewer, I'm taking some of my roses, and I'm working some of my roses coming around, and with just 3 roses, notice how that fills it up. Now, that would almost give you the feeling that the whole design is done, but it isn't, because we still have the center that we want to work some of our materials into, and we also want to gradually work them over towards the side as well and towards the other side of the arrangement. And so I'm taking some of my roses, and I think you can get an idea pretty well what's happening here. I'm just gradually working them in. I've got 3 in the front, I've got 3 in towards the center, and I'm going to work some in towards the back of the arrangement as well. These are quick and easy. That's what I love about this kind of design. It's quick, it's easy, it's showy. I am practically, really the design is practically making itself. I'm not working excessively hard on this, and I don't think you will find it excessively difficult either, because these designs practically design themselves. Now, I could keep it like this, where you see it almost like rose, or I could make it a little more irregular. In other words, I could place a rose right here and put it slightly off to one side, so it doesn't feel quite as regular in terms of being in a set of rows. And that gives it a little bit more interest in terms of where we're going on this. Now we can add other things to this. We have, for example, some spray roses. You never can go wrong with spray roses, because I can take a few and then just mix them here and there into my arrangement. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. Taking a few of my spray roses and then just mixing a few, placing them here and there in through the flowers. Once again, my viewer, what I'm doing on one side, we would do on the other side as well, so that it looks pretty much the same all the way around. And I could stop at this point if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. We still have some spaces that are showing. You don't see it so much from this angle, but on the top I know that there are a few spots that are open. So what I'm going to do is take a little more of my kale, and I'm going to fill in with the kale. The kale gives me the advantage of texture. It also gives me the advantage of color. It fills the area very, very nicely for me. And it makes a kind of an interesting, what I would call, conversation point, because people are going to look at something like this and they're going to say, wow, that's interesting. That looks like something in the salad. And you know, they may be right, because it does give a really, really cool effect. We could stop at this point if we wanted to. I'm going to take a few pieces of some of my accent botanicals, in other words, a little bit of some of our status. This is optional. You may like this, you may not like this. It's up to you. A lot of designers like using accent botanicals. I find that accent botanicals do have their place. They add a little bit of visual variety and interest to our arrangements. And so I'm going to take some of my accent botanicals in the form of status, and I'm working it a little here and there through my design. Again, it's something that depends on you, depends on the color scheme that you're working and so forth, whether you do something like this. But either way, I think it kind of gives a cool effect. Isn't this beautiful? I haven't worked very hard. I mean, I've been basically sitting here and chatting with you guys while I've been adding this stuff. It gives a very, very sleek, contemporary effect. It requires very, very little effort. If we were doing a party or a function in a large room with a number of tables, these things can be cranked out very, very quickly, and it is definitely upscale. Now I'm going to show you one more thing, my viewer, that you may or may not like, and it really depends on you. I happen to have a thing. I like branchy stuff. Now, not everybody likes branchy stuff. Some people like branchy stuff, and some people don't like branchy stuff. But what I like to do is almost like a garnish. I like to take a little bit of my branchy stuff. It could be curly willow, it could be other kinds of branches that you use, and I like to add it because I think it adds kind of an untamed, kind of wild look to our design, and it creates kind of a nice counterbalance to some of the more traditional flowers that are a little bit stiffer. I think that when we start adding some of these, it makes it feel a little wilder, a little bit more interesting visually. And so I'm taking these, working them in, and this could be vine that you get from ivy, it could be curly willow vine, it could be kiwi. There are so many different things out there that you can get that really give a very, very interesting look in terms of adding some branch kind of material to your designing. And again, I'm taking a few, I've worked some through the center over there. I'm going to place another piece or two over here so that we get this effect. And I would do it also over towards the other side as well. This is optional. In other words, if you like that kind of an effect, I think it's really cool. If you don't like it, certainly you don't have to. But I think you can see, my viewer, that in this centerpiece that we're doing today, it certainly is not a conventional one. We have here the use of our kale. We have prestige materials like hydrangea, roses, some Fujis. We've got branchy stuff here. It's elevated. It is not elevated high. You still can see over it. And on a large table, this is definitely something you may want to consider. So what do you think, my viewer? Quick, easy, and fun. That's the Rittner Floral School way. And I think that if you start playing with different kinds of containers, with different kinds of shapes, different kinds of textures, play a little bit with height, mix some of your things from the produce section of your supermarket along with some of your prestige flowers, and I don't mind telling you, these roses smell amazing. You can come up with some pretty neat things, quick, easy, and fun. On behalf of all of us here at Rittners Floral School, it was a pleasure having you come in and visit with us today. Please keep an eye on the various videos that we're putting out there, and also, by all means, visit our website at floralschool.com, and also our Facebook page as well. We're constantly putting all kinds of interesting resources out there for your enjoyment. On behalf of all of us here at Rittners Floral School, I'm Dr. Steve Rittner. We thank you for coming in and visiting with us today.